The nanny was fired without explanation, but what the millionaire's daughter revealed left everyone in shock. The suitcase hit the floor when she heard the words that would change everything. Lauren Miller never imagined that after 3 years of taking care of little Sophie, she'd be fired for no apparent reason. She gathered her things, trying to hide the tears that just wouldn't stop falling. No one understood what had happened until the millionaire's daughter whispered something in her father's ear. And what she revealed left the businessman completely devastated. If you're enjoying this story, leave us a comment telling us what state you're listening from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this one. Alright, let's continue. The weight of the injustice felt heavier than any luggage. Lauren Miller walked down the veranda steps with her eyes fixed on the wooden floor, counting every step as if that could distract her from what had just happened. 20 steps to the gate. 20 steps to leave behind 3 whole years of her life. The setting sun in Carmel by the sea painted the estate's redwood walls in golden hues. She thought about how she always loved this time of day, when the light streamed through Sophie's bedroom windows and the two of them would make up shapes in the shadows cast on the ceiling. A bird, a butterfly, a star. She didn't look back. She knew if she did, she would cry, and she had already cried enough in the staff bathroom while packing her belongings. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 blouses, the sky blue dress she wore for Sophie's 4th birthday, the hairbrush the little girl loved using to comb her favorite doll. She left the brush behind. It belonged to that house, to that life that was no longer hers. The driver was waiting next to the black SUV with the door already open. Mr. Raymond was a man of few words, but the look he gave Lauren said it all. He didn't understand either, nobody did, and maybe that was for the best, because if anyone asked for the reason, she wouldn't know how to answer. James Harrington had simply called her into his office that morning and told her, with the flat voice of someone reading a business report, that her services were no longer required. No explanation, no warning. Without even looking her in the eye while he spoke, Lauren got into the car and rested her forehead against the cold window glass. The estate started getting smaller in the rearview mirror, and with it, the silhouette of everything she had built over the last 3 years. She had arrived there at 26, freshly graduated in early childhood education from a modest state college, with no experience other than babysitting nephews and nieces during the holidays. The employment agency sent her almost by chance, a temporary replacement that became permanent when Sophie, then barely 2 years old, refused to sleep with anyone other than her. Sophie had that power to choose people, to look at someone and decide with that absolute certainty only children possess whether that person deserved her affection or not. And Sophie chose Lauren on the very first day, when the previous nanny, an experienced lady of 55, couldn't get her to stop crying. Lauren simply sat on the bedroom floor, picked up a picture book, and started making up different voices for each character. The little girl stopped crying. She looked at her with those big green eyes, so similar to her father's, and reached out her little arms, asking to be held. From that day on, they were inseparable. The car passed through the central park of Carmel with its charming cottages and the fountain where Lauren used to take Sophie to watch the birds bathe on warm afternoons. The girl loved throwing breadcrumbs and laughing when the sparrows fought over the biggest piece. Sometimes James would appear by surprise, escaping from some meeting, and the 3 of them would sit on the wrought iron bench eating vanilla ice cream with caramel. They were rare moments, but precious ones. Moments when the businessman seemed to forget the numbers and meetings that dominated his life and simply existed there, present with his daughter and the nanny who took care of her. Lauren closed her eyes and let the tears flow in silence. They weren't tears of anger, even though she had every right to feel angry. They were tears of early nostalgia, of a grief that was starting before the absence had even fully settled in. She was going to miss the smell of lavender from the fabric softener Mrs. Josephine used on the sheets, the strong black coffee Mr. Raymond made every morning just like he said coffee should be. Sophie's laughter echoing through the hallways when they played hide and seek. She was going to miss, even though she shouldn't. James's silent presence at dinner, when he would show up too late, and find the 2 of them already in their pajamas, watching cartoons in the TV room. He would always stop at the door, always watching for a few seconds before announcing his presence. And Lauren always pretended not to notice, even though her heart raced every time she felt his gaze on her. That was wrong. She knew it was wrong. A nanny shouldn't feel anything but professionalism for her employer. But feelings don't ask for permission to exist. And in the last few months, Lauren had been fighting a silent battle against something growing inside her uninvited. Maybe that's why getting fired hurt so much. It wasn't just the job, it was the closeness, being able to be near him even from a distance. Being part of that universe, even if only as an employee. The car left Carmel and took the coastal road leading to the neighboring town, where Lauren rented a small room at the back of a retired lady's house. She was going back there now. She would go back to the single bed, the two-burner stove, the life she had before meeting the Harringtons, and she would try to somehow move on. Back at the estate, the silence that settled in after Lauren left had weight to it. Mrs. Josephine, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years, was washing the lunch dishes with more force than necessary, pots banging against the steel sink in a symphony of disapproval. She didn't say a word when James told her the decision. It wasn't her place to question him, but her eyes. Those eyes that saw the boss grow from a child into a businessman made it clear she didn't agree. James was in his study, the door closed, his eyes fixed on the computer screen without really seeing the numbers. He had done the right thing. He repeated that to himself like a mantra. He had done the right thing. Monica Reynolds had been clear that morning when she called from Los Angeles. Her voice loaded with that artificial sweetness he knew too well. Monica Reynolds, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he was about to marry before meeting Ellen, Sophie's mother. She reappeared 4 months ago during a business event in San Francisco, more beautiful than he remembered, more refined, more everything. She said she heard about Ellen's death, that she was deeply sorry, that she was there if he needed a friend. James, exhausted from carrying the weight of widowerhood and fatherhood alone, accepted that extended hand without questioning the intentions behind it. The visit started out sporadic. A dinner here, a lunch there. Monica, always impeccable, always saying the right things, always flattering Sophie, even though the little girl solemnly ignored her. And it was Monica who planted the seed that morning, with the subtlety of someone who knows the art of manipulation well. "Doesn't it seem strange to you?" she said, her voice too casual to be innocent. "How that nanny looks at you. I noticed it last weekend. The way she watches you when you're with Sophie. It's not normal." James, an employee shouldn't have that kind of interest. He tried to argue. He said Lauren was professional, dedicated, that Sophie adored her. But Monica insisted with that way she had of turning her assumptions into absolute truths. "I'm telling you this because I worry about you and Sophie. A girl that age shouldn't get so attached to an employee. It's not healthy. And if that girl is getting her hopes up, if she's confusing things, you're a single, rich, handsome man. It wouldn't be the first time an employee tried to take advantage of the situation." The words kept hammering inside James's head for the rest of the day. He watched Lauren during dinner, looking for signs of what Monica described, and found or thought he found a look that lasted a second too long, a smile that seemed nervous when their eyes met, little things that, under the lens of suspicion, grew into enormous proportions. The next morning, he made the decision, called Lauren into the study, paid her double all the severance she was owed, and fired her. He didn't give explanations because he didn't know how to verbalize something he didn't even understand well himself. He only said it was a business decision, that it had nothing to do with her performance, and wished her good luck. Lauren left without saying a word, without crying, without begging, without asking for explanations. She simply nodded and went to pack her things. And that silent dignity, for some reason, hurt James more than any scream or accusation could have hurt him. Now, alone in the study, he wondered if he had done the right thing. The question spun in his mind without finding an answer, like a broken record, always repeating the same snippet. He had done the right thing. He had done the right thing. He had done the right thing. Upstairs, in a room decorated with butterflies and unicorns, Sophie was hugging Lauren's pillow and crying softly, not understanding why her favorite person in the world had left without saying goodbye. The pillow still had her perfume, that scent of chamomile shampoo the girl associated with affection, with bedtime stories, with long hugs on rainy afternoons. Sophie was barely 4 years old, but she already knew the pain of absence. First it was her mom, who went to sleep one day and never woke up again. Now it was Lauren who had simply disappeared, as if she had never existed. The little girl squeezed her pillow tighter and made a silent promise with that fierce determination only very small children possess. She was going to bring Lauren back. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she was going to find a way, because some people are just too important to let go like that without a fight, without an explanation, without at least a goodbye hug. The days that followed brought a strange stillness to the Harrington estate. Mrs. Josephine carried on with her chores with the same efficiency as always, but there was something different in the air. A silent tension that no one dared to name. Meals were served right on schedule, clothes were washed and ironed with care, and the floors were waxed until they shined. Yet, the sound was missing. Sophie's laughter running through the hallways was gone. The songs Lauren made up for every moment of the day were missing. That light energy that only a happy child's presence can bring was gone. Sophie stopped talking, not completely, but almost. She answered questions with one-word answers, ate barely enough not to worry anyone, and passed the hours in her room hugging the pillow that still held Lauren's scent. James tried to talk to her the first night. He sat on the edge of the bed and asked her if everything was okay. The little girl just looked at him with those big, sad eyes, so much like Ellen's, and turned to the other side without answering. That look stayed with him, haunted him during meetings, invaded his thoughts while he was signing contracts, and appeared reflected in the office window glass when night fell over Carmel. James knew that look well. It was the same one he saw in the mirror in the months following Ellen's death, when he would wake up at dawn and reach out to the empty side of the bed, hoping to find the warmth of a body that no longer existed. Monica called on the third day, all excited, talking about a trip she was planning for the two of them. A resort in Maui, a whole week just to reconnect, to build something new far away from day-to-day responsibilities. James listened in silence. He agreed with some things, disagreed with others, and hung up feeling emptier than before. Something didn't fit, something he couldn't identify, like a puzzle piece put in the wrong place. On the morning of the fourth day, Mrs. Josephine knocked on the study door with a worried look. Sophie had woken up with a fever. Nothing serious, probably just a virus, but the girl was calling for Lauren in the middle of her delirium, repeating her name like a desperate prayer. James took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart clenched, and found his daughter curled up under the blankets, her face flushed, her eyes shiny with tears and fever. He sat down beside her and put his hand on her forehead. It was hot, but not alarming. Sophie opened her eyes and for a moment seemed not to recognize him, looking for someone who wasn't there. "Where's Lau?" she murmured, using the affectionate nickname only she used for Lauren. "I want Lau." "Daddy, why did she leave?" James swallowed hard. He hadn't prepared an answer for that question, even though he knew it would come sooner or later. Lau needed to go. "My love, sometimes people need to follow their own paths." Sophie shook her head, stubborn even in the fragility of her fever. She didn't want to go. "I saw her. She was crying in the bathroom." James's stomach froze. Lauren, crying. He imagined the scene. The young woman locked in the service bathroom, stifling her sobs so no one would hear, packing her things with a broken heart. And he was the one who caused that. He didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye while he fired her. "You saw her crying?" he asked, his voice hoarser than he intended. "Yes, she thought I was asleep. But I woke up to go to the bathroom and saw her going in." She was doing this. Sophie mimicked the gesture of wiping tears from her face. And she was talking to herself, saying what? The girl seemed to struggle to remember, the fever clouding her memory. She said she didn't understand, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that she was going to miss me so much. Sophie's eyes filled with tears again. "Why did you send her away?" "Daddy, Lau loves me. She said she loves me. She's not like the others who only stay for the money." James felt every word like an accusation, because it was one. His 4-year-old daughter was telling him with the brutal clarity of children that he had made a terrible mistake. And deep down, really deep down, he already knew it. He knew it from the moment he saw Lauren walk out the door without looking back, carrying that silent dignity that had haunted him ever since. "Rest now, sweetie," he said, kissing Sophie's hot forehead. "We'll talk when you feel better." But Sophie grabbed his hand with surprising strength for someone so small and sick. "The lady from L doesn't love me, Daddy. She pretends," she smiles, but her eyes are cold. Lau isn't like that. She has warm eyes, just like Mommy did. The mention of Ellen knocked the wind out of James for a second. Sophie rarely talked about her mother. She was so little when she passed away. She held on to feelings more than clear memories. But she remembered the eyes. She remembered the warmth. "What do you mean?" "Sweetie." Cold eyes. Sophie shrugged like the answer was obvious. "That lady looks at me like I'm just something in her way. Lau looks at me like I was the most important thing in the world. It's different." "Dad, you can feel it." James stood there in silence for a long time, processing his daughter's words. Kids pick up on things adults choose to ignore. They don't have social filters. They don't rationalize suspicious behavior. They don't give the benefit of the doubt to someone who doesn't deserve it. Sophie had no reason to lie or exaggerate. She was just describing what she felt with the absolute honesty of a 4-year-old. What if she was right about Monica? What if all that sweetness was just a carefully built mask? What if James, blinded by loneliness and the need to have someone by his side, had let himself be manipulated by the wrong person? Thoughts were crashing into each other in his head as he tucked the blankets around Sophie and promised to come back soon with medicine for her fever. He went downstairs in a daze and found Mrs. Josephine in the kitchen making a light broth. He stopped beside her, not knowing exactly what to say. The housekeeper knew him too well not to notice that something was wrong. She kept stirring the pot in silence, waiting for him to find the words. James leaned his hands on the marble counter and let out a long sigh. "I messed up, Mrs. Josephine." It wasn't a question, but the woman answered anyway. "You messed up." "Yes, sir. Did you know? I know a lot of things that go on in this house. Mr. James, I've worked here since you were wearing shorts." She finally stopped stirring the broth and faced him. That girl was the best thing that ever happened to Sophie. And to you too, only you were too proud to admit it. It's not pride. It's just that Monica said, "Miss Monica." Mrs. Josephine interrupted, saying the name with an almost imperceptible disdain. "She says a lot of things, but words are easy. The hard part is looking at actions." Lauren stayed 25 days without a break when Sophie had chickenpox. She slept on the floor in her room, gave her oatmeal baths every 3 hours, and sang until she lost her voice. Miss Monica showed up once during that whole time, stayed 20 minutes, and left complaining that she couldn't get infected because she had an important event. James didn't know that detail. He was traveling during Sophie's chickenpox, closing a deal in Seattle, trusting that his daughter was in good hands, and she was in the best hands possible. Hands that he fired without explanation, without gratitude, without even a thanks for everything. "How do I fix this?" he asked, more to himself than to Mrs. Josephine. The housekeeper went back to stirring the broth, hiding a discreet smile. "You're a smart man. You built an empire from nothing. I'm sure you can figure out how to apologize to a 29-year-old girl who just wanted to do a good job." James nodded slowly, a plan starting to form in his mind. He needed to find Lauren. He needed to look her in the eyes and ask for forgiveness. He needed to understand what he really felt for her. Because the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about that face since the day he fired her. But first, he needed to take care of his daughter. He went back up the stairs with medicine and a glass of water and found Sophie already asleep. Lauren's pillow still clutched tight against her chest. He gave her the medication with care, smoothed the blonde hair scattered on the pillow, and made a silent promise. He was going to bring Lauren back. He didn't know how she would react. He didn't know if she would accept, but he was going to try, because some people are too important to let go like that without a fight, without an explanation, without at least a genuine apology. And as night fell over Carmel, painting the sky purple and orange above the ocean, James Harrington finally admitted to himself something he had been denying for months. Lauren wasn't just a competent employee. She wasn't just the perfect nanny for his daughter. She was the woman who, unintentionally, without planning it, had found a way to parts of him that he thought had died along with Ellen. And now, because of his own cowardice and Monica's poisonous words, he ran the risk of losing her forever. The little room at the back of Mrs. Meredith's house had a small window that looked out onto an oak tree. Lauren woke up every day to the song of the mockingbirds nesting among the branches. And for a few seconds, before opening her eyes completely, she forgot where she was. She forgot that she wouldn't be waking up to Sophie jumping on her bed, asking for pancakes with maple syrup. She kept forgetting she wouldn't be walking down the estate stairs anymore, smelling Mr. Raymond's coffee. She kept forgetting she'd been tossed aside like an object that had lost its use. Then reality would come crashing back, heavy as lead. And she'd force herself to get up even though she didn't want to. It had been 1 week since she got fired. 7 days that felt like 7 months dragging on forever. Endless. Filled with an empty routine she made up just to keep from going crazy. Wake up at 6. Shower. Make coffee in the chipped mug Mrs. Meredith lent her. Sweep the patio in exchange for lower rent. Eat whatever for lunch. And spend the afternoon sending resumes online from her phone. Eat a light dinner. Sleep poorly. Repeat. Mrs. Meredith was a 74-year-old widow who rented out the small back room to supplement her pension. She didn't ask questions, didn't give unwanted advice, and baked apple pie every Wednesday, leaving it at Lauren's door without saying a word. That quiet kindness was all the young woman could handle right now. Anything more, any bigger show of affection or concern, and she would fall apart completely. On the morning of the 8th day, Lauren was hanging clothes on the line when her phone rang. Unknown number, Carmel area code. Her heart started racing before she even answered, because deep down she knew, she felt with an unexplainable certainty, that this call was going to change things. Hello, Lauren. Mrs. Josephine's voice sounded on the other end, familiar and comforting, like a distant hug. Thank God you answered. I tried calling yesterday, but I couldn't get through. Mrs. Josephine, did something happen? Is Sophie okay? The silence that followed lasted barely 2 seconds, but it was enough to make Lauren's stomach churn. She's sick, my child. She's had a fever for 3 days. The doctor says it's a virus, but I know it's more than that. The poor girl won't eat, won't play. She just cries for you. A fever, a virus? Lauren asked, her voice cracking. It all happened so fast. Mrs. Josephine, I didn't even really understand what went wrong. I know, dear, I know. The housekeeper's voice carried a suppressed indignation. But I didn't call just to give you news. I called because Mr. James wants to speak with you. The world stopped for a moment. Lauren dropped the clothes she was holding and stood there staring at the garments swaying in the wind without really seeing them. Talk to me. About what? That's something he'll have to tell you in person. All I know is he's been different since you left. Quieter, more thoughtful. Last night, he spent the whole night in Sophie's room. He slept in the armchair next to her bed. I've never seen him do that. Lauren didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream that she had zero interest in hearing anything James Harrington had to say, that he'd humiliated her, tossed her aside, and made her feel like a criminal being kicked out of a house she loved. But another part, that stubborn part that still held on to feelings it shouldn't, wanted to know. She needed to know. Where does he want to talk to me? He'll come to you, if you let him. Of course, I don't want to force anything. He said he understands if you don't want to see his face, but he asked me to ask you first. Lauren wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. She looked at Mrs. Meredith's simple patio, the oak tree heavy with leaves, the small, modest life that was now her reality. She had nothing to lose. She'd already lost everything that mattered. He can come tomorrow morning if he wants. I'll be here. Mrs. Josephine thanked her. She promised that Sophie was sending kisses, and then hung up. Lauren stood in the patio for a long time, phone still in her hand, her heart beating in an erratic rhythm that was a mix of anxiety, anger, and a foolish hope she couldn't just snuff out. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing all the things she wanted to say to James. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to know what she had done that was so terrible to deserve that kind of humiliation. She wanted to look him in the eye and see if she could find any trace of remorse, any sign that this cold, calculated firing had cost him something too, and more than anything, she wanted to understand why she still cared so much about a man who treated her that way. The sun rose golden over the coastline, and Lauren got up with dark circles under her eyes and a fragile determination. She took a long shower, put on the sky blue dress she'd worn to Sophie's birthday, the only nice dress she owned, and pulled her hair back into a low braid. She didn't want to look like she'd dressed up for him, but she didn't want to look defeated either. At 9:30 in the morning, the black SUV pulled up in front of Mrs. Meredith's house. Lauren watched from the window of her small room, her heart racing a mile a minute, as James got out of the driver's seat. He was driving himself without Mr. Raymond, without anyone. He was wearing jeans and a casual beige shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired. He looked smaller than she remembered, as if the weight of something invisible was hunching his shoulders. She took a deep breath and stepped out onto the patio. James spotted her before she could steel herself for what was coming. Their eyes locked through the wooden fence, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. They just stood there, separated by a few yards in a chasm of unspoken words. He was the one who finally broke the silence. Can I come in? Lauren nodded and opened the gate. James stepped into the yard and looked around, eyeing the clothesline with its simple clothes, the oak tree, the modest little house in the back. She felt like he was judging her. Lauren didn't show it, though. She just crossed her arms and waited for him to say what he'd come to say. I owe you an apology, James started, his voice raspier than usual. An apology I don't even know if I have the right to offer after what I did. Why did you fire me? The question came out straight, No beating around the bush. Lauren didn't have the patience for polite pleasantries. James ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she knew well from watching him so much. Because I was a coward and an idiot, and I let someone plant doubts in my head about you. Who? He hesitated, but answered, Monica. He stopped as if the next word tasted bitter. Girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend. I actually broke up with her yesterday. Lauren felt something shift in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. And what did she say about me? That you were interested in me, that the way you looked at me was inappropriate, that you might be trying to use your closeness with Sophie to get something else out of it. The words landed between them like stones. Lauren felt her face burn, a mix of shame and outrage that threatened to explode into tears or screams. And you believed her? I did, he admitted, meeting her gaze with difficulty, because it was easier to believe her than to face the truth. What truth? James took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice came out almost like a whisper when he answered. She wasn't completely wrong about the looks. I mean, except it wasn't just you, it was me. Too, I was looking at you in a way I shouldn't have, and that scared me. So when Monica pointed it out, when she put into words what I'd been trying to ignore, I panicked. Instead of handling it like an adult, I fired you, thinking that would make the problem go away. Lauren stood there in silence, processing every word. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree, and somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. The world kept spinning like normal on the outside, indifferent to the earthquake happening inside her. You humiliated me, she finally said, her voice trembling. You made me feel like I'd done something wrong. I spent a whole week wondering where I messed up, what I could have done differently. I cried every night, thinking about Sophie waking up and not finding me there. I know. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life if I have to. James swallowed hard. But I came here because I need you to know the truth. All of it. Even the part I can barely admit to myself. He took another step. He was close enough now for Lauren to see the deep bags under his eyes, the worry lines on his forehead. You weren't just my daughter's nanny. Lauren, you never were. I was just too much of a coward to admit it while you were there. James's words hung in the air between them, heavy and vulnerable, like a confession dragged out by force. Lauren felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not from anger, but from something more complex she couldn't quite name. Here was the man who had humiliated her, who had made her cry for nights on end, admitting he did it all because he was scared. Scared of her. Scared of what he felt for her. She should be furious. She should send him packing with the same cold words he'd used to fire her. But the fury didn't come. Instead, a deep exhaustion washed over her. The weariness of someone who'd spent days building walls that were now threatening to crumble with a single confession. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. You want me to say everything's fine, that I forgive you, and we just pretend nothing happened? No. He shook his head. I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't come to ask for that. I came because you deserved to know the truth, and because my daughter needs you. Sophie. The little girl's name shifted something in Lauren's face. The hardness in her eyes softened. Her shoulders relaxed, almost imperceptibly. James noticed it and pressed on. She hasn't been the same since you left. She won't eat right, won't play, won't laugh. She's been sick all week. And the doctor said part of the fever was emotional. He called it stress. My 4-year-old daughter, with stress, because I was too much of an idiot to realize what I was doing. Lauren felt her eyes burn, but she refused to cry in front of him. Not yet. I loved that little girl like she was my own, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Every night I sang her to sleep. Every morning I woke up with her jumping on my bed. Every time she called me Lau. You have no idea what that meant to me. Now I know because I saw what your absence did to her. And to me, the last 3 words came out almost like a whisper, as if James was admitting something he still struggled to say out loud. Lauren looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since he got there. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble from days without shaving, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. That wasn't the cold, controlled businessman who fired her without an explanation. He was a broken man, lost, trying to pick up the pieces of something he'd destroyed himself. Tell me about her, Lauren asked, surprising herself with the request. About Sophie. What did she say when she woke up and I wasn't there? James swallowed hard. The question clearly hurt him, but he answered anyway. She went to your room. That little room next to hers where you used to sleep. She opened the door and just stood there, staring at the empty bed. Mrs. Josephine said she stayed there for almost an hour without speaking, just staring. Then she asked, "Where's Lau?" His voice cracked. I didn't know what to answer. I said you had left, that sometimes people need to go away. She looked at me with those huge eyes and asked, "But she's coming back, right, Daddy?" And I couldn't answer. Lauren couldn't take it anymore. Tears rolled silently down her face as she imagined the scene. Sophie standing in the doorway of the empty room, waiting to find her Lau, finding only cold sheets and absence. The image hurt more than anything James could have done directly to her. "I want to see her," Lauren said, wiping her face with her hands. "Not for you, not for that job. For her, I need to explain to her. Say goodbye properly. Make her understand it wasn't her fault. Can you come back? To the estate. To your job with Sophie." James took another step, close enough now for her to feel the heat radiating from him. Not like before. Not in that dynamic where I pretended you were just an employee and you pretended not to notice my stares. In a new, honest way. Lauren stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. "Are you asking me to come back to work for you after all this?" "I'm asking you for a chance to fix what I broke. To prove to you and my daughter that I can be better than I was. And Monica, it's over. I ended it with her the day Sophie told me she had cold eyes. My 4-year-old daughter saw in minutes what took me months to see." Lauren let out a short, humorless laugh. Sophie was always smarter than any adult in that house, including her father. The silence that followed was different from before, less tense, more thoughtful. Lauren looked at the oak tree, the dark, ripe acorns peppering the branches. She remembered how Sophie loved acorns, how the two of them used to collect them and make little crafts, laughing at nothing. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "I can't give you an answer right now. I understand. Take the time you need. And if I decide I don't want to come back," James held her gaze, and something in his eyes changed. A raw vulnerability he clearly wasn't used to showing. "Then I'll respect your decision. But let me take you to see Sophie one last time. She deserves to say goodbye." Lauren considered the proposal. It was risky going back to that estate, seeing the little girl she loved, feeling the weight of a life that wasn't hers anymore. But Sophie deserved it. That little girl deserved at least a goodbye hug. "All right. But just to see her, it doesn't mean I'm coming back." "Understood." James reached out his hand, not for a formal shake, but in a gesture of truce. Lauren hesitated for a moment before accepting. His hand was warm and firm, and the touch sent a current up her arm that she pretended not to notice. Half an hour later, they were in the car on the way to Carmel. Lauren looked out the window, watching the landscape pass by like a blur of green and blue. The ocean in the distance, the deep blue sky, the little houses scattered along the road with their flowery balconies. That land had its own smell, of salty air and coffee, something she only noticed when she missed it. James drove with concentration, hands firm on the wheel, jaw tight. Every now and then, his eyes drifted to the rearview mirror, looking for her face, trying to decipher what was going on behind that expression. But Lauren kept her gaze fixed on the window, refusing to give any sign of the whirlwind happening inside her. The truth was, she already knew the answer. She knew it from the moment Mrs. Josephine called talking about Sophie's fever. She knew it from the instant she saw James get out of that car, smaller and more vulnerable than she remembered. She was going back, not for him, not for the job, not for the money. She was going back because that little girl was the closest thing to a daughter she would probably ever have. And she was going back because love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't consult reason. It doesn't care about past wounds and humiliations. But she wasn't going to make it easy for him. James needed to understand that his actions had consequences. He needed to get it into his head that she wasn't some disposable object he could fire, and then snap his fingers to call back whenever it suited him. If she was going to come back, it would be on her own terms. With respect, with dignity, with the certainty that she would never be treated like that again. The car pulled into Carmel along the main road, passing the historic Mission and the park where they used to get ice cream with Sophie. Lauren felt her heart clench with the familiarity of those streets, those seaside facades, and that smell of food wafting out from the open windows. She had missed this so much, more than she wanted to admit. When the estate appeared on the horizon, white and imposing against the blue of the ocean, Lauren held her breath. The last time she saw that house was in the rearview mirror of Mr. Raymond's car, everything blurry through her tears. Now she was coming back through the front door with the owner himself right beside her. James parked in the driveway and killed the engine. Before opening his door, he turned to her. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." Lauren just nodded without answering. The words had dried up in her throat. They got out of the car together, but before they could even take 3 steps toward the door, a high-pitched voice cut through the morning air. "Lau, Lau." Sophie came running down the hallway in her pajamas. Her blonde hair was still a mess, and her face was lit up with a smile Lauren hadn't seen in over a week. The little girl scrambled down the steps, tripping over her own feet, and threw herself into her nanny's arms with a force that almost knocked them over. "You came back. Daddy brought you back." Lauren hugged Sophie with everything she had, burying her face in the girl's soft hair, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and home. The tears came without warning, soaking into the unicorn pajamas, while Sophie kept saying over and over, "I knew you were gonna come back. I just knew it. I asked Mommy's angel to bring you back." And he did. And in that hug, Lauren knew she was lost. There was no decision to make. There never was. Her heart had already chosen long before her mind even had a chance to have a say. The days that followed Lauren's return brought a quiet transformation to the Harrington estate. It wasn't anything dramatic or announced, but rather a change you could feel in the details. Sophie's laughter echoed through the hallways again. The smell of apple pie that Mrs. Josephine baked on Wednesday afternoons was joined by the aroma of chocolate chip cookies Lauren had learned to make with her grandmother. The windows stayed open longer, letting in the ocean breeze and the songs of the birds nesting in the garden. Lauren was back, but she set clear boundaries. She spoke with James the first night after Sophie fell asleep, leaving her conditions on the kitchen table next to 2 steaming cups of coffee. She wanted a formal contract with all her labor rights guaranteed. She wanted her own space respected, no invasions, no assumptions, and she wanted time to rebuild the trust he had destroyed. James agreed to everything without blinking. He signed the papers the very next day. He guaranteed her room would remain off limits and promised to prove through actions, not words, that he deserved a second chance. Lauren listened in silence, nodded her head, and went back to Sophie without saying another word. If he wanted to win back her trust, he was going to have to work for it. The weeks went by in a comforting routine. Lauren would wake up early, make breakfast with Mrs. Josephine, and go upstairs to wake Sophie with tickles and kisses on her forehead. Mornings were dedicated to educational games, walks in the garden, and long reading sessions in the library that Ellen had set up before she passed away. Afternoons brought calmer activities, drawing with crayons, playing with colorful Play-Doh, and taking naps cuddled up in the hammock on the porch. While the wind rocked the leaves in the trees, James watched from a distance. He worked in his study with the door cracked open, his eyes constantly drifting to the hallway where Sophie was running after Lauren. Sometimes he would come down for lunch and find the two of them in the kitchen, Sophie sitting on the nanny's lap. While Mrs. Josephine told stories about when James was a little boy, he would sit at the table and listen in silence, smiling discreetly whenever his daughter laughed at some old mischief of her father's. They were small moments, seemingly insignificant, but they were slowly weaving a new dynamic between the three of them. Lauren still kept her distance from James, answering his questions politely, but without the intimacy they'd had before. He respected that space, never forcing conversations or closeness, letting her set the pace for rebuilding things. It was Sophie who started bringing him closer without even meaning to. The little girl had a particular way of seeing the world, an intuitive wisdom that frequently surprised the adults around her. She picked up on things everyone else tried to ignore and just said them out loud, with absolutely no filter. One Sunday afternoon, while the three of them were out in the garden, Sophie dropped her doll and looked up at her dad with that serious expression that would sometimes take over her little face. "Daddy, why do you keep staring at Lau like that?" James practically choked on air. Lauren, who was crouched down planting lavender in the flower bed, pretended she didn't hear a thing. "Like what, sweetheart?" "Like this." Sophie tried to copy her dad's face, furrowing her brow and squinting her eyes. "Like you want to say something, but the words are getting stuck." Mrs. Josephine, who was hanging up laundry nearby, let out a soft chuckle and tried to hide it with a cough. James felt his face burn. "I was just thinking, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups get lost in thought and make weird faces. You were thinking about Lau, weren't you?" Sophie smiled, pleased with her detective work. "It's okay. Daddy, I think about her too when she's not around. That's because we love her very much." Lauren finally looked up from the garden bed and caught James's eye over the top of Sophie's head. There was something in that shared look that neither of them could quite name. A silent question, a possibility hanging in the afternoon air. The moment broke when Sophie ran off chasing a blue butterfly, and life went back to normal. But something had changed. A door that had been shut was now standing ajar, just waiting for someone to have the courage to walk through. The next few days brought them a little closer together. James started coming home early from the office, just in time to have dinner with Sophie and Lauren. Sometimes he'd bring sweets from the bakery in downtown Carmel, those little donuts his daughter loved so much. Other times, he'd show up with new books for the library, carefully chosen, on topics he knew Lauren was interested in: child education, emotional development, and coastal gardening. She noticed the effort. She noticed how he'd get up first to serve her plate at meals, how he asked about her day with genuine interest, actually listening to her answers instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. She noticed how much more he was playing with Sophie, being truly present, putting down his phone and his work worries to build sandcastles on the nearby beach during weekends. One night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Lauren went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and found James sitting at the table alone, with a half-empty bottle of wine and a picture frame in his hands. She hesitated, standing in the doorway, not sure if she should interrupt, but he'd already noticed she was there. "Ellen," he said, without her even having to ask. "It's been 3 years today." Lauren walked over slowly and sat in the chair next to him. In the frame, a beautiful young woman was smiling at the camera. Green eyes identical to Sophie's, brown hair falling over her shoulders in soft waves. She was beautiful, Lauren said softly. She was beautiful inside and out. James ran his thumb over the glass. "Sometimes I look at Sophie and I see so much of her. It hurts. The way she tilts her head when she's thinking, that smile when she's up to no good. Even her stubbornness. Sophie talks about her sometimes. She says Mommy turned into an angel who lives in the clouds and sends messages on the wind." James smiled a sad, bittersweet smile. That was Mrs. Josephine's idea. When Ellen died, Sophie was 2 years old. She didn't understand what was happening. She just knew Mommy wasn't coming back. Mrs. Josephine started telling her that angel story, and Sophie really clung to it. Now she talks to Ellen every night before she goes to sleep. She tells her about her day, asks for advice. "I know," Lauren said. "I've seen her do it a few times. It's really beautiful." They sat in silence for a moment, the kitchen clock ticking away the seconds, softly. James set the picture frame down on the table and turned toward Lauren. "I never thanked you properly for everything you've done for Sophie these past 3 years, for being the mother she needed when I was too busy mourning the one she lost. You don't need to thank me. I love that little girl. Taking care of her was never a sacrifice. But it was more than just taking care of her. You taught her how to laugh again. You showed her that there are people in this world she can trust. You filled a void I didn't even know existed in this house." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "And in me, too." Lauren felt her heart start to race, but she kept her expression neutral. "Lauren, I know I promised to give you time, and I'm going to keep that promise. But I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't confusion. It's not just loneliness, and it's not Ellen's memory projected onto someone else. It's real. It's about you, Lauren, about who you are, about how you make me want to be a better person." She didn't answer right away. She let his words settle, weighing each one carefully. She looked for any sign of falsehood or manipulation, but she didn't find any. Just a vulnerable man sitting in a dark kitchen on the anniversary of his wife's death, pouring his heart out to a woman he'd hurt. "I'm still scared," she finally admitted. "Scared to trust and get cast aside again. Scared to believe I have a place here, only to find out it was just an illusion." "I get that. And I'm going to prove to you every single day that you have no reason to be afraid. For however long it takes." Lauren looked at the framed photo of Ellen, the frozen smile of a woman she'd never met, but whose presence she felt in every corner of that house. What do you think she'd say if she could see this? James considered the question for a moment. Ellen was the most generous person I ever knew. She'd want Sophie to have a real mother, someone who'd love her unconditionally. And she'd want me to be happy, even if that meant moving on. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the longing without letting it paralyze you. The clock struck midnight, officially closing out the anniversary of Ellen's death. James tucked the picture frame into the pocket of his robe and stood up. "Good night, Lauren. Good night." He walked to the kitchen door and paused before leaving. "Thanks for staying here with me tonight." Lauren just nodded, but something in her eyes had changed. A softness that wasn't there before, a door that was slowly starting to open. The next morning, Lauren woke up to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of little footsteps in the hallway. Before she could get up, the bedroom door opened and Sophie came in carrying a tray that clearly weighed too much for her little arms. Behind her, James was supporting the tray from underneath, hiding his help so his daughter would think she was doing it all by herself. Breakfast in bed. Lao, it was my idea. I made it. Lauren sat up in bed, her heart melting at the scene. On the tray was half-burnt toast, a cup of chocolate milk, and an open jar of strawberry jam with a spoon stuck in it haphazardly. Next to it was a bouquet of garden flowers picked without much rhyme or reason, mixing daisies, mint leaves, and even a sprig of rosemary. Did you do all this for me? Daddy helped a tiny bit, Sophie admitted, climbing onto the bed and snuggling up next to Lauren. But the idea was mine. He only cut the bread because knives are dangerous. James stood in the doorway, watching the two of them with an expression that was a mix of tenderness and nervousness. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still messy from sleep. And yet, Lauren thought she'd never seen him look so handsome. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Yes, Daddy," Sophie answered before Lauren could speak. "Sit here on the other side. The bed is big." The innocent invitation created an unexpected intimacy. James sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. While Sophie chattered on about how she'd woken up bright and early to prepare the surprise, Lauren ate the burnt toast with gusto, praising every bite, making the little girl beam with pride. "Lao," Sophie said suddenly, with that seriousness that sometimes took over her small face. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" The question floated in the air. Lauren felt James's gaze on her, waiting, but not pressuring her. "Why do you ask that?" "My love, because I asked Mommy's angel for something very important. I asked for you to never leave again. I asked for you to be my real mom." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Lauren felt her eyes burn and her throat tighten. She looked at James and saw that he was just as emotional as she was, his eyes shining with held-back tears. "Sophie, my love," Lauren began, not knowing how to continue. "I know my real mommy is in heaven," the little girl continued, her voice steady despite the heavy topic. "Mrs. Josephine explained to me that she's not coming back, but she said the heart is big, and there's room for more than one love. So I can love Mommy in heaven and love you too, both at the same time." Lauren pulled Sophie into a tight hug, tears rolling freely. Just then, that 4-year-old girl had just verbalized, with the brutal clarity of children, what the adults around her couldn't express. "The heart is big. There's room for more than one love. I love you, Sophie," Lauren whispered against the little girl's blonde hair. "I love you more than you can imagine. So, are you staying?" "I'm staying." Sophie pulled back from the hug and looked at her father with a determined expression. "Daddy." "Now it's your turn." "My turn for what?" "Sweetie, to ask Lau to stay forever. You promised you were going to ask her." James let out a nervous laugh, his face turning red. Lauren looked at him with curiosity. What is she talking about? He took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair in his characteristic nervous gesture. "Last night, after you went up, Sophie showed up in the kitchen. She said she'd heard part of our conversation and wanted to know if I was going to ask you to be my girlfriend. I told her it was complicated, that I needed to wait for the right moment. She made me promise I'd ask this morning." Lauren didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There she was in her pajamas with toast crumbs on her lap, getting a proposal from a 4-year-old girl who apparently had more guts than her businessman father. "And do you always keep your promises?" she asked, a smile starting to form on her lips. "Always, especially the ones I make to my daughter." James shifted in bed, closing the distance between them. Sophie watched with wide eyes, her little hands clenched tight with anxiety. "Lauren Miller," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I know I hurt you. I know I was a coward, unfair, and that you have every right not to trust me. But these past few days having you back showed me something I can't ignore anymore. I love you. I love the way you take care of my daughter. I love the way you turned this house into a real home. I love the way you make me want to be a better man. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve you." Sophie held her breath. Mrs. Josephine, who had quietly appeared at the bedroom door, drawn by the voices, pressed her hand to her chest. "Are you asking me to be your girlfriend?" Lauren asked, her voice trembling. "I'm asking you for much more than that. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, the mother Sophie chose. I'm asking that we build a family together the right way, with honesty and respect. I'm asking you to let me love you for the rest of our lives." Lauren's tears fell uncontrollably. She looked at Sophie, who was smiling with all her little baby teeth showing. She looked at Mrs. Josephine, who was crying silently in the doorway. She looked at James, that man who had hurt her so much, but who was now opening himself up completely vulnerable, waiting for an answer that could destroy him. And she thought about everything she had lived through in the last 3 years. The nights singing Sophie to sleep, the mornings making coffee with Mrs. Josephine, the stolen glances from James she pretended not to notice, the pain of getting fired, the longing that almost drowned her, and the overwhelming joy of returning to Sophie's arms in that garden. Her whole life had prepared her for this moment. Every hardship, every obstacle, every tear shed, it all brought her here, to this messy bed with an anxious little girl by her side and a man in love in front of her. "Yes," she said, the word coming out like a sigh of relief. "Yes," she repeated, as if she couldn't believe she had said it. "Yes, I accept. I accept everything. The relationship, the family, a whole life with you guys." Sophie let out a squeal of joy and threw herself on top of them, turning the moment into a tangled hug of arms and legs and laughter. James pulled Lauren close, his forehead touching hers, eyes closed, breathing the same air. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Don't waste it," she replied, smiling through her tears. "Never." And then, with Sophie squeezed between them and Mrs. Josephine crying in the doorway, James kissed Lauren for the first time, a kiss full of promise, sealing a commitment that went far beyond words, a kiss that tasted like coffee with milk and burnt toast, of mixed garden flowers, of second chances and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, Sophie was clapping frantically. "Now Lau is my real mommy. Can I call her mommy? Can I? Can I?" Lauren looked at James for approval. He just smiled and nodded. "You can, my love. If she lets you, you can." Sophie turned to Lauren with shining eyes. "Mommy!" The word shot through Lauren like an electric current. Mommy. She had never been called that. She never imagined she would be. And now there she was, that green-eyed girl, another woman's daughter, choosing her as her own. "Hello, my daughter," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Sophie smiled, satisfied, and snuggled between the two adults as if she had always belonged there. Because she did. They all belonged to each other, united not by blood, but by something stronger. Love that chooses, that forgives, that builds. Mrs. Josephine finally came into the room, drying her eyes with her apron. "I'm going to make a real breakfast for this family. The three of you deserve to celebrate properly." And while the housekeeper walked away, grumbling about weddings and parties and invitations, Lauren, James, and Sophie stayed hugged together in that messy bed, listening to the waves crashing through the open window, feeling the coastal sun warm their skin, savoring the start of a new life, a life built on truth, redemption, and genuine feelings. A family born not from obligation, but from choice. A love that started with an unfair firing and ended with a yes that changed everything. And outside the window, a blue butterfly landed on the sill for a few seconds before flying off into the blue sky, as if Ellen, wherever she was giving her final blessing to this new beginning. Sophie saw the butterfly and smiled. "Look, Mommy sent a message. She's happy." Lauren held the little girl tight against her chest and looked at James, his eyes filling with tears. "Yes, she is, my love," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm sure she's very happy." And on that golden morning in Carmel by the sea, amidst the ocean and scenic beauty, three hearts finally found their place in the world, together forever. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the true value of the people in our lives, if it reminded you that the purest love is built with actions and not just words, then please help us reach more people. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that touches the soul. Let us know in the comments what impacted you most about this story and which state you're listening from. We love knowing that our stories reach every corner of the country. Remember, sometimes the most precious people are right in front of us, but pride, fear, or the words of others blind us to them. Don't make the same mistake James did. Cherish those who truly love you before it's too late. See you in the next story. See you soon.